Hello, everyone. I'm here with Piers Kaniuka, who is a friend from Maine. And we're going to do this podcast where we kind of talk about when you first saw through the pattern, when you first saw through the matrix, and those life changes that it initiated. And so Piers I know him because of anthroposophy, but he's a long term substance abuse professional. Is that correct?
Fair enough. Yep.
Okay, good. And so I'm really happy to be able to talk to you because we've had a lot of interesting conversations in the past over, study groups where I got to hear about your background. And I'm curious how you will explain it once again. When did you first start to see the edges of the pattern?
Well, when I knew we were going to do this, I started thinking about this, and what I quickly realized was that in my youth, let's say until I was in my late, well, really into my late 30s, but in my youth, I remember there being a lot of dissonance.
Hmm.
So, for instance, I grew up in Washington D.C. and I was born in 1963.
Okay.
So I'm growing up in the aftermath of the Kennedy
Yeah.
assassination. I'm in D.C. for MLK and RFK,
Yeah.
Vietnam War protest. I went to basically pretty much all black public schools. So I
Hmm.
was aware of all these political trends and currents, and everything's so charged up. But I can remember funny things. Like I can remember my dad saying, my parents were both solidly Democratic, but my mother was more conservative than my dad. But I can remember him saying like Menachem Begin is a terrorist, and I can remember
Forgive me, I don't know who that is.
he was a former prime minister of Israel,
Oh,
and so this was kind of this post-Holocaust thing. So my dad must have been referring to the founding of Israel and the Nakba or something. And I just
yeah.
remember kind of being taken aback by that. I also remember how the Vietnam protesters all wore military garb all the time, and
Yeah.
and I had my GI Joes and stuff, and my dad explaining to me that they were protesting the war and that we basically shouldn't be in Vietnam, and that causing this kind of confusion. Um, I also remember that in those days, especially in DC, there were still like communist and socialist organizations.
Hmm.
And I can remember, like, I had a camp counselor who was like this militant black activist, a woman, and she started explaining to me that the Soviet Union really won World War II, and they industrialized really fast, and Castro's Cuba, raised people from illiteracy and lowered the infant mortality, all these things, right?
Hmm.
All these
Yeah.
sort of positive gains from socialism and communism, and I would look them up to whatever extent I could, and lo and behold, that's true. And so
Uh-huh.
I had all this dissonance, right?
Yeah.
And Republicans were demons in my parents' eyes. But then we moved to Maine, and lo and behold, a lot of my friends came from Republican families, and I'm
Mhm.
like, they don't seem so bad to me. So I basically had a lot of dissonance, a lot of like something was not quite right on the borders of things, but I
Yeah.
couldn't really square it all away.
How old were you when you moved to Maine?
13,
So it was in the 70s?
76.
Yeah, and did you move to a city or a rural place?
I moved to really rural Maine from Capitol Hill in DC,
Wow.
which was great. It was because I got exposed to, poor white folks for the first time, which I'd never
Right.
seen before. And I could, yeah, so I think I was probably fairly politically not sophisticated, but because of where I grew up in the New York Times and the Washington Post and the protest, I was, kind of sophisticated for a kid.
Yeah.
But I still didn't understand a lot of these tensions, and I didn't know what to think of America. I didn't know what to think of communism. I didn't know what to think of war. I didn't know
Right.
to think of a lot of these things. Yeah,
Okay, so but then I'm guessing, sometime in between moving to Maine and then you moved out west,
right.
that was when things really started to congeal for you. Is that
Well, I
correct?
moved out west and I went to this total hippie college. I went
Oh,
to the Evergreen State College, which is
oh, right.
notorious in its own right. And I got exposed to a lot of what was going on in Iran. I mean, not Iran, in El Salvador. A lot of the ugliness around that, and the
Uh-huh.
Contras and the
Yep.
Sandinistas. But then I also got exposed to like some kind of fairly absurd, politically correct things
In
at,
what decade are
at,
we talking now? The 80s?
in the 80s. Yeah, no, PC was, a lot of the proto woke stuff was going on.
Okay.
So even then I was, and then one of the strangest things that happened was in the late 80s, I was an active drug addict and I knew this guy. This would be, this was interesting. He was like my Coke dealer. And he's the guy who got me smoking cocaine, which
Wow.
terrible thing.
Yeah.
And, you get really weird and paranoid and high when you do that. And we would be getting high and he would start telling me these stories about some nearby police departments and churches where there was all this bizarre sexual abuse of children going on. This is in the 80s.
What? Like,
And I would,
your drug dealer was telling you this in the 80s?
yeah, and I'd be all high on coke, and I would just tell him to shut up because
Yeah.
to me it was just the rantings of a madman. And then one time, I just was remembering this. This is all coming back to me thinking about this. One time we were at his place, and he playing all this. He was a deadhead, and he had all this reel to reel. He had all this paraphernalia, and he started playing me this actual recording of Noam Chomsky saying that it didn't matter who killed John F. Kennedy. And I was
Oh
like,
my
what?
god.
And that was way back then.
Oh, wow.
And so he planted this sort of seed of like something's up
Yeah.
with Noam Chomsky.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so that was a seed. It was a bit of conspiracy theory that I couldn't stomach at the time.
Mhm.
In fact, when the first Iraq War happened, uh, when that fake narrative came out about taking babies off incubators, I was actually outraged at that. I can remember,
I don't recall this. Was this in the 90s? 91,
yeah,
92? Yeah.
when Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, they said that they were stealing incubators out of Kuwaiti hospitals and throwing the babies out of them.
Oh god.
It's just another version
Yeah.
of beheading children and all that. And
Right.
I bought it. I bought it hook, line, and
Yeah.
sinker. I mean, I was definitely, I was raised in a household where the Washington Post and the New York Times were gospel.
Mhm.
And then, of course, in my 20s, I was a devoted listener to NPR. So, it
Mhm.
was all kind of shaped by,
Yeah, but I mean, NPR back in those days was much more moderate.
it was much more moderate, but, it wasn't. Eventually, I would realize that we weren't really being given any choice between in foreign policy and economic policy. Not
Right.
really. Voters didn't have any influence on that. We were allowed to fight amongst each other over domestic policy,
Mhm.
gun rights and abortion and what have you. And that dawned on me maybe even before I started getting wise to conspiracy theory. I'm not sure. But
That's
the
actually
thing
a
of it
good
too
word.
is back then they didn't. This whole conspiracy theory thing, people don't realize this. It was called parapolitics and the deep state, and it came from the left. It did not come from the right.
The
It,
word deep state came from the left?
yes, it came from Peter Dale Scott at the University of California, Berkeley.
Oh
So
my
all of the
goodness.
early conspiracy theorist stuff, not all of it, but because a lot of it came out of a weird John Birch thing,
Mhm.
a lot of the early stuff came from the left.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And where did people get conspiracy theory information prior to, like, the internet?
There were the names that would come up would be things like, and now they're all sort of strange and dubious. Well, Peter Dale Scott would be a more uh, very venerated, still is, figure on the left.
Mm-hmm.
But then there would be people like in the pop culture, like Robert Anton Wilson,
Mm.
who really is, I would say now, looks to be more of a he's a counterculture figure of the right, really,
Mm-hmm.
because he was parroting a lot of the stuff that came from the John Birch Society, which did say a lot of stuff about the Anglo-American banking establishment and all this sort of thing.
Right.
He would be a figure. Then there would be figures, hangovers from the '60s. Could you call them conspiracy theory or not? I don't know. But this would be kind of a lot of stuff coming out of psychedelic culture, like Timothy
Yeah.
Leary or Terence McKenna or things like that. Kind
Yeah.
of the suggestion that there's a sort of programming going on. Of course, there was always a lot of stuff around the assassinations.
Yeah.
That was maybe the bigger part of it back in those days.
And so in your DC childhood, what was the vibe that you encountered around the assassinations? Were people buying it?
Well, I can remember being horrified when my father told me he bought it, that it
Oh.
was the single bullet theory,
Uh-huh.
the lone gunman. And I can remember arguing with him and him getting not grumpy, but maybe a little troubled by what I was saying. I don't really remember that because I was a kid too. I remember, I go to my black friends' houses and there would be these commemorative plates on the wall with Jack and Bobby and
Uh-huh.
MLK. They were kind of they were sainted figures by then.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
But did we talk about that? I guess Watergate, because I was right there for all of that. That led to a kind of see, it's still proto conspiracy theory because we weren't getting at the narrative behind the narrative,
Mhm.
but something wasn't right.
Right.
Yeah, so it was all kind of like that. No one ever suspected, Gloria Steinem having a relationship with the CIA or
Or Tim Leary having a relationship?
or Timothy Leary,
Yeah.
although that did start coming out a little bit. It was we were it was a different time. It was a very
Yeah.
different time. Yeah.
Yeah. And so then bringing this we'll go back again, but bringing it forward, like, the pace of kind of mass information and
Yeah.
awareness of
Yeah.
disconnect. How did you experience that?
Well, basically, I had two big things in like one within a couple years. So 9/11 happened.
Mhm.
Well, I can remember first the hanging chads and the debated election with Gore and Bush, and that didn't seem right to me. But then 9/11 happened, and I bought the narrative hook, line, and sinker.
Mhm.
And but then about a year later, my father hung around with these guys that called themselves the socialists,
Huh.
and one of them had this VHS tape called Aftermath, and it questioned the whole 9/11 narrative. And this might be a year or two later, but what's so weird about this tape, if you could find it, is that some of the voices on it that questioned the narrative were people like George Soros and Mike Rupert and Cynthia McKinney. And so they lumped, and Alex Jones, first time I ever saw Alex
Mhm.
Jones. So they were all lumped into the same tape. It was
Really?
very, very strange, but they gave you enough information to say, there's something definitely rotten in Denmark. That
Mhm.
really got me. That got me big
Mm.
time.
Mhm.
And the other thing that got me was um, I had a teacher who explained, by now I'm in recovery, and she gave us the intel to go with it. She explained that there is no chemical imbalance theory of mental illness.
Oh my.
That's not even remotely true. It's never been
Right.
proven.
Yeah.
It's an urban legend at best. And
Wow.
so between those two things, I started going down these rabbit holes where I started investigating psychiatry and,
Yeah.
the history of it and all that. And at the same time, the 9/11 thing and some pieces started falling together there. Who else was on that tape? Was Peter Dale Scott was on that tape too.
Interesting.
Um, and then the weirdest thing happened was um, I was married at the time, or we weren't married yet, but I was with my soon-to-be wife, and she worked at a sexual abuse victim emergency services place, phone line, a bunch of resources, publicly funded or grant funded, and we lived in the same building where she worked. And one day she comes home and she says to me, she says, some of these people that come in here, they just come in and they kind of sit on the couches and they're kind of older women, they're kind of bag lady-ish, and they say the wildest things. And basically the staff just kind of lets them be and drink coffee and tea. But they're saying all this stuff about these not clubs, these clubs, I guess, but not clubs, like these lodges or clubs where men get together and they sexually abuse girls and women and they trade in them and all this stuff.
Oh my God.
And I said, oh, please. I said, that's all that crap. That's all that false memory syndrome thing. Because
Right.
my Coke friend, when he told me that, eventually, right around the same time he told me, the Utne Reader and a few other liberal rags came out debunking the whole thing and calling it satanic panic.
Oh
And
yeah, I
I
remember that
Yeah, and I
phrase.
devoured that hook, line, and sinker. And then
Yeah.
when I'd be doing coke with my friends, he would start up and I'd say, that's all bullshit. And it's
Yeah.
all, therapists are inducing all this.
Yeah.
And so when she said that to me, I was like, that's all bullshit. I came at her with all the satanic panic stuff. And, she didn't get too defensive. She just goes, I don't know. It seems like something. And it all changed when I walked in, and don't even try to get me to tell you. I walked in the apartment one day, and one of these women were sitting at the bottom of the stairwell, and I had to walk by her to go up the stairs. And when I walked by her, she said something to me that was so disturbing,
Oh
and it
God.
sounded like it almost came from the ceiling or something.
Yeah.
Very strange, very bizarre. It was so disturbing that I've never repeated it.
So, do you
And,
feel like
and
it?
after that, I was like, this is just too strange. And I started doing research in
Yeah.
that area. Yeah.
Do you think it was something she said or that she somehow channeled it? What are you saying here?
I have no idea.
Uh-huh.
All I know is I was alone with her in a stairwell and she did something that was borderline paranormal without making eye contact.
Wow.
And it really, really freaked me out.
Mhm. And you told your wife about it?
I did. And then I started doing research, and the story ends like this in a very bizarre way. So, what was it that I would get into? Eventually, I learned about the Franklin cover-up, I believe. You know about that? The
No.
Omaha. The Franklin cover-up was it happened in the Bush administration. Uh, I believe the second Bush, and it was an Epstein operation coming out of the investigation fixated on a savings and loan in Omaha, Nebraska, and it was Republican, and it was Jerry Spence and all this stuff in D.C. Not Jerry Spence. He was not him. Last Richard Spence. No, not him. Anyway, there was an Epstein-like figure, and this is when it's also related to the Johnny Gosch story, Boys Town,
Mm.
and it's basically an Epstein narrative, except it's Republicans
Mhm.
and it's boys and not girls.
Oh God. Uh-huh.
And Nick Bryant fantastic journalists covered it. And so I would look up that story, and occasionally I would get on these. I would just do a. For me, the conspiracy theory wheel started turning, and what I still this way. I will look at it till I'm totally sick of it and weirded out and don't know what to think, and then I leave it alone for a while, and I get the itch later, and I go back to it, and I usually had a couple pet 2 or 3 topics that I
Yeah.
investigated, and this Franklin cover-up was one of them. And I found myself
Mhm.
on this thread, and I'm just scrolling through the thread, and I get to this thread. The title reads "The Strange Death of," I'll just give the initials of DG, but they
Mhm.
didn't give his initials; they gave his name, and that is my coke dealer.
Oh
And
my
I
god.
knew I knew that my coke dealer had been murdered, but we thought it was just a drug deal that went sour.
Right.
But what this thread read was, I knew him, and he had this radio show which he did, and we shared an interest in some of these, parapolitical topics. And he said that he kept a file on
Oh,
all these players that he knew about.
wow.
And this was, you can look this up. Still, it was the city of Tumwater, which is next to Olympia, Washington. It was a police department. I believe it was also a Pentecostal church. But anyway, my dealer had kept all these files on and been doing research for a long, long time.
Wow.
And he said in the thread, he said after he was murdered, they could not find the file.
So,
And on
the
top of
likelihood is
that, they never recovered the dealer's hands or his head. He was dismembered. And in some like criminal circles, if you want to prove that you've killed somebody, you provide the hands or the head or some such. So that really that freaked me right out. Yeah, yeah,
well, that's pretty intense, actually.
it's very intense. It's very strange, and it's those kinds of things that over the years have led me to believe, and I believe this more strongly now than I ever did, that these networks, this Epstein syndicate or whatever you want to call the network, we are all proximate to it. We all are
Mhm.
just very few degrees of separation. And
Right.
of course, if you're involved in things like drugs or entertainment or whatever, maybe military, maybe mental health, any number of things, you might
Yeah.
get a little closer to these networks.
Yeah. Yeah. So that is, I think that's a good segue into, how drugs have been, let's say, proliferated in our country, in our culture, and also how mental illness, and I'd like to hear about your current theory of mental illness.
Well, the thing about mental illness is that if you really study it historically, you'll see that the mental it's like the evolution of consciousness.
Yeah.
People don't always have the same maladies over time.
Right.
Like in Freud's time, there was a lot of people had what do they call that? Conversion symptoms, meaning that somebody like he would have these. A lot of his clients were upper class, sexually frustrated women. Their husbands were having affairs and such, and they would have paralysis in their right arm. And they would do the analysis, and some of the truth of things would come out. What really was going on in the family, and then the arm would work again.
Wow.
That's a conversion symptom. I can't remember what they exactly call that. You never see that anymore. You
No.
never see that. Similarly, way back when there were only a handful of things that were recognized as mental illnesses. Like there was a thing called dementia praecox, which was basically everything from mania to full blown psychosis. So that would cover schizophrenia,
Mhm.
bipolar 2, schizoaffective disorder. It was all on a spectrum, right?
Yeah.
For depression, there was a distinction that was made between what they called endogenous depression versus circumstantial depression. Like most
Mhm.
depression is circumstantial. This
Right.
is it's true now, true then. But they did acknowledge that there's a certain kind of depression where you couldn't really see something in the person's life that explained it. And so now you see we have like 100 different kinds of depression, all these
Oh.
little. Yeah, so the whole franchise of what's mental illness has expanded dramatically.
Mhm.
Um, when you start looking at these things in light of indigenous cultures, intact ones, there's very little of these contemporary disorders. So there's a lot of things that may fall under supernatural.
Mhm.
But, my teacher, Robert Sardella, once famously quipped that you only need psychology, or psychology only emerges in the absence of cosmology.
Oh, yeah, that's a
So
good line.
once it is great because once we're bereft of meaning, we
Mhm.
have all these, especially around death, we have all these issues come up.
Mhm. Yeah.
So then, if you study psychiatry, well, first of all, if you study psychology historically, what you'll see is it's very interesting in light of Steiner. So, before the Protestant Reformation, the care of souls in the West was largely the Catholic Church.
Mhm.
And it can be quite sophisticated, their understanding of what goes on with us in relation to things like virtues and vices and so on, evil spirits. And then when the Protestant Reformation came along, the educational system in the Protestant countries got separated from the church. And it's usually credited to a guy named Philip Melanchthon, who was a contemporary of Luther's, but I don't know if it's true. But he's usually said to be the one who coined the word psychology. And
Oh,
now
really?
psychology becomes an academic discipline divorced
Yeah.
from the church. And it was not long after that that they got rid of the concept of the soul
Oh.
because they were trying to get rid of everything that smacked of the Enlightenment was
Mhm.
emerging and
Yeah.
rationalism. And so we got to get rid of all these superstitious elements. But if you look at Steiner, he says, well, in 860, we get rid of spirit.
Mhm.
And then by the time we get to the beginning of psychology, we get rid of soul. And
Mhm.
now we become totally materialistic.
Yeah.
Jung and Freud will try to resurrect soul in the beginning of the 20th century, but it won't last really.
Mm.
So now you have this word psychology that makes no reference to the soul at all.
Right. Yeah, that's, I mean, so there's a couple ways to take this question, but in German, of course, the word Seele, soul, Seele. I've understood that to have either the meaning of mind in the kind of materialistic sense or the more spiritual sense. I'm even lacking words because we can either use the anthroposophical language or we can use, like, the colloquial language.
Yeah,
But, the idea being that soul I mean, what I understood from Steiner is that it's really being pushed out now.
it's being pushed out now, but we kept mind.
Yeah.
But the metaphor for the human being now is something like a biocomputer.
Yes. Yes,
Yeah.
and it's so appealing to people to use all these computer analogies to explain the human being, which frustrates me to no end.
Oh yeah, but if I have a group of room, if I'm running a group and I say, they're all drug addicts in early recovery or alcoholics, I say, "Where's your soul?"
Oh,
Nobody points here. Nobody, not a single person.
where do they
They
point?
all point here.
Interesting. Wow.
So they still point to the heart, or some of
That's
them even be smart enough to say, "Well, it's your heart and your gut."
oh,
It's this
wow.
whole kind of this realm. Yeah.
What other questions do you ask, like, "Where's your mind?" Like, where else do you go with that
No,
questioning?
I mean, what I do is the threefold human being in psychology. Well, that threefolding in understanding the person is ancient. So
Yeah.
in early Christianity, it was spirit, soul, body, and that tracks not exactly with thinking, feeling, willing.
Mm.
And so what I do is I use a model of addiction that I've created that kind of leans into those three things.
Yeah.
Um, and I see addiction primarily as a soul malady, with the emotional part being the most relevant. Now, of course, with Steiner, thinking is a function of the soul. So, and when I try to, when I think of the spiritual aspect of thinking, where where do these worlds interpenetrate? I usually come down to attention,
Right.
um, because attention is a great mystery. The materialists can't account for it. They don't know
Where
where
we put our attention?
they don't like the functional MRIs have mapped out all these. They know where the compassion is in the brain, the spindle cells, or they know where mirror neurons are, which enable us to read people's inner states, and they know where all the sensory cortexes are, from somatosensory and olfactory and all that. But they can't find attention. They don't know what it is. They do know that if you direct your attention in certain ways, it can change your brain. But
I didn't know.
they don't know what attention is. Yeah.
That's
So it's
fascinating.
wonderful. It's beautiful.
Wow.
And it speaks a lot to anthroposophy, but also speaks a
Yeah.
lot to conspiracy theory, or it speaks a lot to all valid religious traditions having disciplines to master one's attention,
Yeah.
and
Mhm.
how it's in the interest of a lot of people or forces to not master your attention.
Right. Right, so, I mean, that one of the bullet points I had written to you was what we're calling the MK ultrification of everything, which is, of course, that's a catch-all term. MK Ultra was a CIA program, but it's also become a phrase that refers to this ongoing, massive mind control program that's just spread everywhere.
There are just psyops running on top of psyops.
Yeah.
There are psyops running at cross purposes of other psyops.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing.
So when did you first start to notice this?
Well, it took me a while to realize, you know, to really look at myself in terms of my own programming,
Mm,
because I think psychologically we all want to believe that, maybe you're programmed, but I'm not programmed,
of course.
right? Or that you have some little insight, some knowledge on some conspiracy
Right.
theory, and you feel like that's liberated you.
Yeah.
I think the thing that really got me was through the drug and alcohol and mental health research. I started realizing that most addicts are manufactured, and
Okay,
that
what
we're
do you mean
not.
by that?
Sex, drugs, and rock and roll, the gutting of the middle class, the
Yeah.
commodification of substances, making them illegal to make them worth more,
Mhm.
the money generated serving high finance and intelligence operations,
Right.
on and on and on it goes. It's just a bunch of Russian dolls nested in each other. And in a
Yeah.
sense, the drug addict on the street is the final, little product at the end.
Mhm.
Um, and so, the drug culture, which is always marketed towards young people, or at least, I don't know what the culture is now anymore, because like music and I suppose, the celebration of criminality and hip hop and all that. But I come from a time when it was a huge celebration of, sex and drugs and rock and roll.
Right.
Crime wasn't part of it, but it wasn't quite so glam. So, you give that to a pubescent boy who's disaffected or whatever.
Mhm.
It gives them a sense of belonging. It gives them excitement. I often think that when most of us, people like me anyway, and there are a lot of us, that when we start getting high, like when I start smoking pot when I'm 11,
Mm.
I find relief for all these things. In my case, it was my parents' marriage and the neighborhood I grew up in and being scared. And suddenly, I don't care about my parents fighting, and the guys I was scared of accept me as a peer and get high with me.
Yeah.
But there seems to be this thing that happens with a lot of people where when you start using drugs and alcohol, you find a solution to a problem you didn't know you had.
Which go on.
That's actually really profound.
But what does it mean? Like, what is the problem that you find out?
It means that children, I mean, Steiner said that, in the second half of the 20th century, the social fabric would be totally rent.
Yeah.
And so children growing up in the second half of the 20th century are growing up with this sense of malaise and what have
Mhm.
you, fear, dread. I don't know, it varies. the family's falling apart, what have you, and they discover drugs and they have
Mhm.
relief from that. And for a period of time, they actually have fun and they have a peer group and all that sort of thing.
And
So,
with
and it is, for me, it was a fuck you
yeah,
to white picket fences and mortgages and marriage and all the rest of it. I didn't want any of that anyway.
right.
And the part of me that could see through a lot of that was actually kind of astute.
Yeah,
But my solution to it was the sex, drugs, and rock and roll.
right. And what do you see with the youngest generation of adults that you might encounter now in addiction programs? How's
Well,
it different?
they've really changed. So digital culture
Yeah.
is had. I mean, they'll be writing books about this for a long, long time. I mean, the data's already coming in, so it's causing a huge loss of social intelligence, a lot more depression, a lot less embodied. Especially boys, they're not in their bodies anymore. They don't
Yeah.
play sports. They don't do manual labor. The drugs are also much, 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 much cheaper than they ever were.
Oh, really?
Oh yeah, drugs have practically given them away,
Huh.
and they're adulterated in a way that they never were. So
Mhm.
people don't know what they're taking. And one of the biggest drug dealers around is the doctor.
Yeah.
So between all that, diminished economic prospects, especially for boys, is another big factor. So you're seeing a lot of men that are infantilized now.
Mhm.
Men are in a state of total crisis in this country,
Mm.
young men.
Yeah.
Women are not quite as bad. It's still affecting them, but it's not as bad. I mean, part of what really is affecting women is the men
Mhm.
because
Yeah.
they're so useless.
Mhm.
Uh, so we got a real crisis going brewing, and
Right.
it's a disenfranchising of a large percentage of people. But that seems to be by design because in a globalized, financialized economy, there's no place for these people.
Mhm.
The guy who created that show, The Wire, David Simon, he said it's a Holocaust in slow motion, and that when you are no longer economically relevant in this country, we have no use for you.
Yeah.
So we'll make some money off of you on the way out
Mhm.
for prison labor or SSDI, paying taxpayers paying for your medications,
Yeah.
that kind of thing. So I personally don't think, with regard to the drug thing, I think it's entirely by design.
Mhm.
I don't think it's because we have a failed policy. I don't think it's because the drug problem is so bad that we don't know how to work with it. I think we do,
Yeah.
but I don't think there's nothing. It's all. I was reading this morning. Harry Solomon's got this interesting book about Western civilization, and he really shows that this notion of technocracy is really quite old.
Mhm.
Yeah, and this idea of he says it got a real impetus in Bolshevism, but he says there's Western versions of it too. But it's basically that there's got to be this caste of experts
Yeah.
who are going to decide what's best for the rest of us, that whatever that is, and they implement all these policies that you didn't vote for.
Right.
You never heard a politician talk about them, and
Right.
yet now they're implemented.
Right.
And that's the way I
And
feel like a lot of the drug thing is.
that makes sense. So I think, the reading I've done indicates the word technocrat was in use in the 20s or 30s. Maybe
Yeah,
you've
it
encountered
was.
it earlier, but that seems to be the first time that at least phrase was being used. Probably the concept was there before, but still, that's a very like what do I want to say? It's like a sterile method of managing a society, whereas the drug culture seems really messy, and then also like satanic ritual abuse seems really messy, and I don't understand how these things are coexisting or working together?
Well, I mean, that's why I think that there are ops and ops at cross purposes. There's ops
Yeah.
to escape all this, and often those ops are cults or they infiltrate religion,
Mhm.
or they feed fairly racist narratives.
Mhm.
Um, there's also, well, you're right about the messiness. I mean, the thing about the messiness is that the chaos, the chaos that lives inside of people now is begging for some kind of resolution. And I think that that leads people to get led by their nose
Uh-huh.
towards that resolution,
Eh,
whether it's a political vantage point or a cult or a medication or,
yeah.
you know, I think I agree with you. I mean, if you're saying one thing you're saying is the chaos now is so much greater than it was just 10 years ago.
Yeah.
I couldn't agree more. But I
And
think
I
that that's serving purposes.
right, so my question is essentially like these systems were set up. Let's say they were designed. They're multi-generational. There's an elite and they have set up a some series of consequences, and it doesn't make sense. Like, what is the point of addicting huge
Power,
swaths of the country
power
or
and
the
control and make a shit ton of money while you do it.
yeah,
And
like
it's keeping the plebs preoccupied so they don't rise up.
mhm. Yeah, preoccupied is probably the key point.
But I think what we're seeing now, my hope is, my suspicion is, and I don't pretend to see through the ops. I mean, every time I've been played so many times. I mean, I don't know. I think it's really important to accept that one has been programmed.
Mm,
But what I think I see now is that it feels like with this war and with the Epstein files, it feels like the two are related somehow. I mean,
yes.
there's some people that are saying that there are non-state actors who have the files that have hacked the files. They have all of them, but they're very dangerous and valuable to have. There
Huh.
are other people that say that Israel has all the files, which would make total sense.
Yeah, I would expect they did.
Yeah, I would too. And that what they did was they released enough of the files to bully Trump into the war. That makes a
Mhm.
lot of sense to me.
Mhm.
But what I feel like is that now, because of the files, a whole bunch of the ops got unplugged. I really feel this in my core of my being,
Turned off?
turned off because there are people scared now, and that this group of people or these layers of people, they are so decadent and they are so arrogant and they are so lazy and frankly they're so dumb
Yeah.
that they just thought that they could do this forever. And now all of a sudden all this stuff is coming out and people are waking up and getting angry, and they're jumping ship and they're unplugging the ops, because if the ops stay on, they're going to be able to trace because the ops are all going back to the same nexus,
Yeah.
at least in the West. I think the East and Russia and all that's different.
Yeah, it's hard to
At
know
least
that.
it seems to me that it is.
Mhm.
But yeah, that's what I suspect, because when I'm walking down the street now, it feels different.
It
There-
does.
It feels like the air is cleared or something. And it feels like some people are very confused. They
Yeah.
don't necessarily want to talk about some things,
Right.
but yeah, I feel what's happening now, although it's going to mean real economic hardship for us in probably any number of ways. That's the least of it. I think that it's really very good.
Mhm.
I think
Yeah.
what's happening now is like spectacular, and it's bigger than 9/11, and it's bigger than 2008, and it's bigger than COVID. It's bigger than all of
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. Yeah. And So, I talked to Robert Karp a couple weeks ago,
Hmm.
who's anthroposophist, and one thing he mentioned that we talked about is the significance of 2033 being 100 years after 1933, and that actually 33 would have been the actual calendar beginning date, meaning 33 AD, the
Yeah,
resurrection date.
sure.
We are now 7 years prior to that, 7 years prior to 2033, so there's this cycle that we're starting, and, yeah, I thought that was really interesting.
I think it is really interesting. Um, I know Robert. I met him
Mhm.
a few years ago. Very interesting guy.
It was really nice.
Um,
Yeah.
I
I
do. I just think that, I read this thing today that only got released by Steiner or by the Anthropos in 1990, where Steiner, it's just a little addendum he wrote to something. And he said something about, he was talking about the Anglo American establishment and the elites running it. And, he's talking after World War One and how we needed to wake up to this.
Mhm.
And he's talking also about, our antipathy to Russia and trying to prevent the emerging spirit self and so on and so forth. And then he says, if we don't wake up to this, he's saying he says something like the spiritual development will have to happen through war.
Oh, God.
So he says that, spiritually the things are going to play themselves out, but rather than through an awakening, it's going to be through war. It's similar to what he says in that thing of,
Angels? Yeah.
yes, but he
Work
never
of
gets clear with that. He basically
yeah,
says, if we fail in this mission, it's going to go from the astral body to the etheric body, and I don't know what the hell that would look like, but I feel like that's where we are.
yeah.
Yeah,
It For the people who didn't know what we were just referring to, it's a lecture called "The Work of the Angels in Man's Astral Body," which is really famous and appears to be talking about what has happened in the past 20 years, and it was given probably in the 19 teens.
yeah, it's a remarkable piece, especially what it says about sexuality,
Yep.
technology, and medicine.
It says everything that happened. Like, the
Pretty
the
much.
part that I had wondered about for a while was, the thing about these vibrational machines everywhere, and now I flat out think that's cellular and Wi-Fi technology, because those are
The machines that he was making reference to.
yeah, and
Hmm.
it could be. Anyway, so moving on, you also have been working a lot with this idea of conscience and
Yes.
consciousness soul.
Yeah.
Where have you come with that work?
Um, Well, there's just something, so consciousness, soul, the I, but waking up to itself and in a sense to its own power and responsibility. And this happening at a point in time and it being related to the Christ, encountering the Christ, being able to, realize the I or eventually the higher self. And then there being all these forces that are opposed to this.
Yeah.
And I feel like that this is the sort of drama that we're living out. Conscience in the age of the consciousness soul, Goethe calls it the divine within.
Huh.
It's very prominent in this whole 12-step thing. And Tomberg will actually talk about the conscience being the vertical dimension in this
Yeah.
time, meaning this is one of the main ways that we can stay attuned and connected with the spiritual. And he
Yeah.
says the horizontal dimension is the encounter with evil in
Oh,
this time. And so we are being called to wake up to our conscience, act conscientiously, so on and so forth, even as the reality of evil becomes revealed to us.
yeah.
And so that's kind of the way I understand that. I for me that's very much not easier. What's the word? It's whatever, my karma. I don't know what to call it. But because of the 12-step thing, and because I am just not one of these people that's going to be able to faithfully do the subsidiary exercises. I mean, I am going to be able to do contemplative work, and I'm going to do a little yoga, and I will study faithfully, and I pray every day. I
Mhm.
am not going to sit there and look at a pencil for 5 minutes. It's just
I
not happening.
Yeah, I get it.
But when I feel that I am called to be a witness to the evil, and be part of this changing consciousness and humanity, and that my relationship with Christ is a function of conscience and
Mm,
truth,
yeah.
well, I can work with that.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're with me in the morning. Sorry, it's coffee in the morning.
I'm also coffee in the morning. Are you writing a book on conscience?
I'm getting ready to teach a course on conscience and recovery. Well, no, that's not right. uh, 12-step recovery in light of anthroposophy, which there will be a lot of notes, and there's a
Yeah,
whole curriculum. So maybe that'll come to become an article or a small book or something. But yeah,
that'll
yeah.
be interesting. So, the other thing that, uh, Piers emails me and some of our friends interesting links that he encounters, and you've emailed 2 in the past couple of weeks that I wanted to talk about. The f I Despite the fact that I make podcasts, I almost never watch videos. And so it's been like I have to or listen to anything. So I've listened to parts of both of what you sent. One was a 4.5-hour podcast on gate programs.
Oh yeah.
And I listened to about half an hour of that, and I was like, "Whoa." What do you So you said you had some weird memories, and explain what gate programs are just in
The
case.
GATE programs are these programs. I wish I could give you better background, but they're for uh, precocious, talented kids. They're sort of advanced placement programs for kids, and people are beginning to notice that a lot of people were in the GATE programs, including Jeffrey Epstein. Um, and I can remember the GATE programs. I can remember them like I was in public schools in D.C., but there was this woman came. They took a few of us in this room, and this woman just started teaching us math in some way that I was just like, what on earth? But we learned the math. I mean, we knew it anyway, but it really kind of jump started us. And I never really thought much about it until I started reading about these GATE programs. But the weirder one was, and this is quite strange, I somehow wound up in this program in the Smithsonian.
Mhm.
And they would take us into the bowels of the Smithsonian where there was all this freaky stuff.
Oh, wow.
And the things that stick out that are really weird was they showed us, I think they let us handle it. They showed us an urn from antiquity that had the ashes in it of a sacrificed child. And I can remember we were all like, whoa, 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 whoa. And we were little kids, and it was the weirdest thing. And I know I'm not making that up because I also remember they gave us a mummy's hand that was not attached to the mummy, and it still had some of the wrapping on it, but there was like jewels on the rings on the fingers,
They let
and
you
how
touch
that
this?
was how that was so sort of mesmerizing to children. And then the third thing I remember was there was a child in that cohort who was we were small. We were like 7, 8 years old, 9 maybe. And this child was making sexual advances on us. And none of that I wouldn't have thought of that until, somebody brought up the GATE programs. And
That's
the whole
cra
thing was really bizarre. And of course, my parents are gone. And I can't ask them how it came about that I wound up in there.
right.
But
And so you sent that to me, and I realized that I was in those programs too, and, I realized I have 7 years of 0 memories. I remember 1st grade.
really,
Yeah, I remember 1st grade and maybe 1 episode, and then I remember being about 13 and saying, "I'm not doing this anymore," but I have no memories of what happened in between. And because so I was in Maine, and when I was 7, it was about 1986. So my memory was they were calling it G&T program, which sounds pretty bad. It sounds like gin and tonic program. So I looked it up to see if that's really what it was called. I think it was actually called that. And it also looks like it started in 1986 in Maine.
In Maine.
Yeah, because I found legislation related to funding it in 1986 in Maine. And so it makes sense that it would have, gotten to Maine like 30 years later after DC or 20 years later after DC, whatever it was. But yeah, and I've asked now other people I know who are in these programs if they had any memories. Some people do,
And what
but
do they say?
I know someone remembered use of headsets a lot, but these are younger people, so, headsets are widely available in the 2000s. I have no memories, except that
And
at a certain point, I decided I'm not doing it anymore.
have you interrogated your mother about it?
Um, no, and I'm not sure I don't know what she would remember either.
Just this, that you don't now. Do you remember other things from your life through those years?
Yeah, yeah, of course. Yeah.
Okay, so you don't remember anything about the schooling.
Like, I remember outside of the GATE program this is a funny story. I remember in 3rd grade, there were 2 children, 3rd graders, whose parents wanted them to be in the program. And I don't know how this knowledge came to me as another child, but apparently those children didn't have an IQ above the mark, which was either 120 or 125. And one parent was like pushing to get the child in based on their emotional social skills, and another child's parent was like politicking to get their child in, I don't know, based on something else. Which again, like, why would a 9-year-old or an 8-year-old be told these things? I mean, unless the kids were talking.
Yeah,
But I don't remember anything about what happened inside of the program.
or the parents get upset and talk in front of the kids or something.
Yeah.
But that whole, the whole IQ thing in itself, that's a creature of
Culture? I mean,
eugenics. That's a eugenics toy.
oh, yeah.
Eugenicists created that.
Right.
This idea that we're going to, cull the population and
Mhm.
enhance the capacities of the useful. It's
Yeah.
very,
Yeah. And
yeah.
so the idea that they were then having special programs based on measuring that is super creepy.
Well, and
Still, I'm
there's
still
strong
happening.
evidence that that was going on in the concentration camps.
Uh-huh.
That a lot of these things. You see, I noticed earlier I spoke of the history of psychology.
Yeah.
When we get into the history of psychiatry, it gets much, much darker.
Right. The
Much,
drug part.
well, it's the drug part, and it's the eugenics agenda is much stronger there. Euthanasia programs, social Darwinism, all of those things get in there, and it's very dark. And
What like, can you tell a story or
um,
anecdote?
well, the Nazis, their earliest euthanasia program were for developmentally disabled people, or MR, we used to call it.
Mm.
And these folks were, in hospitals,
Mhm.
and there were no gate fences or anything. And that's where the first showers were put in, the first gassing.
Right.
And what would happen is when they were making a determination of who they wanted to gas, they would send the files of those patients to universities where staff psychiatrists would make determinations on who to gas and who not to.
Right.
And then later, when that stuff was operationalized in the camps, they brought personnel from the hospitals and the psychiatrists to the camps
Right.
to do that. And then, of course, we know that there was all the experimentation going on, the results of which became extremely valuable to MK Ultra and
Mhm.
intelligence things after the war.
Yeah.
So it's got a pretty dark history. Um, it's always been heavily linked with mind control
Mhm.
and eugenics, and the medication stuff is, to my way of thinking, is Some of it's probably warranted, I'm sure it is, but the vast majority of it is, it's an attack on the I.
Right. Yeah, that's the key point, and it requires that spiritual perspective to
Yeah.
acknowledge that.
But the attack on the I, is like so pervasive now. Now, Steiner says we're in a time where there are going to be people born without
Yeah.
them,
Right.
and
30%, 35%. Yeah.
some staggering thing.
Yeah.
And so you've got people that don't have them that are easily inhabited. And then you've got people whose eye structure is so weak that they can, be taken advantage of.
Yeah. I think I might have asked you this before, but I wanna ask again. Like, how would you try to assess whether or not you're dealing with someone with a weak eye structure or really no eye structure? And then what would
Well,
you do?
the no eye structure is something that I don't usually let myself think about when I'm
Yeah.
encountering another human being.
Yeah.
But when I think about them in Toto, what I deal with, I can see that there's a certain percentage of people that they're very, very passive. They're very, very childlike.
Mhm.
They don't seem to have what looks to be like a kind of initiative or something. They lack
Mm.
that. They can do things, but they kind of follow along, or they gravitate towards things.
Yeah.
People with weak eye structures, they're going through a lot of, with a personality disorder. I think this is true. The acting out behavior, the attention seeking, or the cutting, or the splitting, or the uh, what we often call borderline,
Mm.
that is a weak eye structure. And those
Yeah.
behaviors are actually ways to maintain some semblance of an eye structure. This is what's so difficult about these people, is because
Yeah.
the behaviors that we all find so difficult are how they keep it together.
Right. Oh, wow, that's interesting.
And then you have people that are prone to psychosis. So that whole side of it, whether it's the certain personality disorders or psychosis, means that the eye structure is so weak
Yeah.
that it gets lost in perceptions, lost in delusions. It's so disembodied, lost in relationships. And fortunately, that seems to be a much smaller percentage of the people I deal with.
Yeah.
Most addicts don't go that way. Most
Mm.
addicts go towards a kind of narcissism.
Oh, really?
Yeah, what I mean by that, it's not a narcissism that meets criteria.
Uh-huh.
These are narcissistic tendencies or traits, but a good way of understanding it is we make things small. That's what a narcissist does.
Yeah.
I make your problems small. My own kind of tendencies are to over intellectualize. So that means I turn all my problems into chess pieces, right?
Uh-huh.
That's a way of making things small.
Okay.
Uh, Narcissism, when it gets bad, can get kind of malignant. And if you're put in a position of power, you invariably abuse, whether that's an underling at work or a family member. But generally speaking, that it's a way of, because you don't have the ego strength to face things, the reality of things, you make them small, you
Mhm.
minimize them. Your wife is complaining, well, she's a bitch. You
Mhm.
make things, you diminish things.
Right.
That can be worked with. Um, not with
How?
it. But well, if the eye structure gets strong enough, then eventually there might be a possibility of an empathic moment,
Mhm.
which generally kind of changes everything.
Right.
Um, this is why things like friendship really, and honesty and truth and all these sorts of things count for a lot. Malignant narcissist, I probably probably can't do much for that. But psychopath, that's a different breed of cat altogether, and that's a predator. That's a Surik. I'm convinced of that.
Oh. Oh,
Those are
yeah.
the those are the Asuric forces walking the earth.
So do you think there were psychopaths prior to, y I don't know, the 1950s, 1940s?
Well, I think it evolved. I mean, if you go into the medieval lore, some people say they were called lycanthropes,
Hmm.
werewolves. They,
Oh,
they had a certain persona, but behind it was this
yeah.
thing. Um, there's some people that believe, and it's a convincing argument. I'm not sure that I buy it, but they believe that Jack the Ripper was sort of prototypical in the sense of the Industrial Revolution and alienation and disposable populations.
Mhm.
The people that were push back on that would say, well, we had psychopathic characters in even remoter antiquity, but they were almost always the elite. They were the people who had the power and the leisure and the
Yeah,
disposable population to do the. I think that's definitely true.
yeah,
But interestingly enough, I think the further you go back, the more you see addiction being more of an elite thing,
yeah.
um, unless the whole population, like in Russian serfdom, is being you know brutalized, and vodka's a panacea. But
Mhm.
alcoholism was often the vice of kings.
Right.
Um, Drug addiction, pedophilia, vice of kings for sure.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, where do you think okay, so now we are 7 years from 2033, and we are facing this world where it seems like there's been actually, as you said, an opening, or maybe some ops have been turned off, and there's some big ones still running, obviously, there's a war.
Hmm.
Um, what do you what do you do to stay grounded, inspired, working? What do you think is the right thing to do with one's time?
Well, I think the funny thing is I think I had more of a kind of worn down, drag myself around feeling 10 years ago than I do now.
Huh.
Um, I think knowledge is power. And I think, I do think anthroposophy really is like a nutritional or something. I mean,
Yeah.
it feeds you.
Yeah.
I think I'm 62. I also think studying, contemplating, getting close to when I'm asked to, all the issues around death are a big deal,
Yeah.
and the idea that you can also work from the other side of the threshold. But 1879, whatever happens,
Mhm.
baleful spiritual forces came down here, and powerful ones did too. And I don't
Yeah.
think there's any doubt of that.
Yeah.
Um, so I feel like we have a I feel like what we're doing right here. I think this is part of what people are being asked to do.
Mhm.
I do think like it might not be the conspiracy theory people so much, but like independent journalists online, around this war, John Mearsheimer and Pepe Escobar and Larry Johnson and all these
Mhm.
people, they're having a profound effect.
Yeah.
And America is kind of really waking up to our history. I think, and I don't, not in some sort of like critical race theory way, but more like who we've been post World War II. If we really can look at that, suffer through the truth of it, whatever, then we're in a better position to appreciate what is potentially great.
Right.
Um, I think America negotiates this difference better than most every place.
That's
I,
interesting.
you know, yeah, I mean, it makes total sense when you think about
Yeah.
it,
Yeah.
right? And so much is made of our intolerance and our racism and such, but you know, go to Japan,
Right.
right? Go to these other places. Some of them are civilizations, and it's pretty bad.
Mhm.
So I'm hopeful about that. I really kind of wonder about this business with the Shia, because it feels like the way Steiner talks about of course, he never predicted this for now, but the way he talks about how Islam kind of thwarted, the second, was it the first appearance of Surat.
Yeah.
And I feel like, this,
That's very interesting.
yeah, because these folks are
Yeah.
impressive as hell. And
Right.
it's a 2,500-year-old civilization. And there are synagogues in Tehran, and there's a large, lot of people converting to Christianity.
Mhm.
And they're very, there was a certain point, and I don't know how this, don't quote me on this, but they say that at a certain point, the Sunnis sort of discouraged the study of philosophy, and the Shia continued.
Hmm.
And they're very rich in literature and poetry. And the Ayatollah who just got killed, he was widely read in Western literature. Like
Hmm.
his favorite piece of literature in English was Les Miserables.
Wow. Huh.
So these are a very,
Yeah.
and they also have martyrdom built into their self-awareness.
Mhm.
And these are very formidable people.
Mhm.
And the fact that he had a fatwa against nuclear weapons, and the
Yeah.
Ayatollah Khomeini had a fatwa against uh, uh, chemical weapons. I didn't
Yeah.
realize that until
Yeah.
recently.
I didn't either. I
So the Iraqis in that war were using chemical weapons on them, and they weren't allowed to retaliate. And the
Wow.
chemical weapons that were being used against them were made by American and German companies.
Mhm.
So it's like there's something, I don't know, there's some kind of whatever this syndicate is, they didn't capture the world.
Yeah.
They captured
Yeah.
a lot of things, but they didn't capture Russia
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
China
Yeah,
or Iran.
I'm intrigued by what you just said about the Seurat connection because so this story is, again, mostly from Steiner, I assume. Um, the 666 year was supposed to be the first incarnation of the beast. Then double 666 would have been the second, and 1998 or
The third.
97 was
Yeah.
the third. And actually, right around then, so right around 1997, we have, Google, Yahoo, all those big tech companies launch.
Yep.
And then 2 years later, we have something, I don't think it was an Islamic uh, jihad story now, but that's how it was presented. And now we have this, again, another Islamic story, which
Right.
is
And,
what's
and
being presented.
demonization of Islam
Yeah,
for the last 25 years has been,
yeah.
yeah, I find it really, really interesting. The other thing that's interesting is, and I've seen this in places other than Steiner. So when Gandhi Shapur happened, when they closed down the academy under Emperor Justinian, and they closed down, this Justinian was trying to wipe out all the pagan remnants
Mm,
in Rome and what have you, and they sent all these scholars in exile go to Gandhi Shapur.
right.
Now, these are people that would study all that pagan stuff, all the pre-Socratics, all the ancient philosophy, probably a lot of mystery wisdom. There was a fair bit of astrology, and all of that will go to Gandhi Shapur, and it will become part of the clerical training to this day. A lot of it.
Do you know where physically Gandhi Shapur is? I
I
mean, other
do
than
not.
Persia?
I do not. But we know, in a sense, too, that
Mani?
Mani
Yeah.
appears there to thwart the Armanization of a lot of that,
Oh, yeah.
because he's really essentially a Christian.
Yeah.
And, now it seems that Manas has this role now that is much more, if we follow somebody like Leavegood, where it's like this, I think this is very consciousness soul, that I understand that every step I make towards the light
Yeah.
cast a shadow behind me. And if
Yeah.
I am to continue moving into the light, I have to integrate that shadow. It's very Jungian. It's very
Yeah.
any number of things, but it also speaks to an awareness of self and a responsibility towards self that I think is quintessentially consciousness soul.
Yeah.
Um,
Wow.
And I don't think I think I'm a big evolution of consciousness guy, and I believe we had to evolve to that point where we could do that, you know. And
Yeah.
we had to be cut off from the spiritual world to do that. I think we can do that now, and I think that's at the heart of uh, recovery from addiction. I think it's
Mhm.
the very essence of it,
Hmm.
and of course that relates to conscience.
Yeah.
So conscience is going to say, okay, if I'm going to keep going, I got to take care of this.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's a good place to wrap up. This has been great. Where do people find you? If do you publish work online still? I know you have.
Yeah, I don't do anything except I curate a Facebook page called Resistance Recovery.
Okay.
So you can find me there. I mean, there's a bunch of stuff online, and I continue doing this kind of thing. So for now, this is kind of it.
Okay. Good.
uh, yeah, yeah.
Well,
It's time for the younger folks to do their job.
I'm not that much younger. I think we're looking for younger folks.
Well, we'll find them.
Yeah, good. Thank you so much.
You're very, very welcome. Thank you. My pleasure.